What's up guys, Eric here. In this video I'm going to show you how to make these epoxy coated decorative coaster tiles using your Silhouette Cameo and Silhouette Studio. To get this project started, we need to make a design in Silhouette Cameo, and the design that I'm going to make here is just basically two different fonts that are put together in a decorative manner. One will be the O, which I put in Regal split font, as you can see, and then the name down below I'm going to use Autumn and November. I'm going to place Autumn and November inside the split of the split font, fuse and weld them together, and then resize them so that it will be the correct size to fit onto my tile. I'm then placing it in the top left corner, which is where I'm going to load my physical cutting mat with my vinyl prior to cutting. Once you've checked all your cut settings, go ahead and send it to your Cameo for cutting. As you can see that I've done here, I've sent it and my Cameo machine is already cutting. And then once your machine has finished, go ahead and remove the decal from your mat and then begin the weeding process. As you can see, I've already started doing. I like to use an X-Acto knife because it has a very fine, sharp point, and then I can easily and quickly weed out very tiny, small details within an intricate design, as you can see there. This particular one does have a lot of small pieces to it, so it was helpful to have a very sharp point on the X-Acto knife blade. Also, it's nice to have a blade in case you do need to cut some vinyl pieces off to assist in the weeding process. Once that's all done, go ahead and apply your transfer tape or your transfer paper. In this case, I'm using transfer paper. Just put a piece bigger than the actual decal and paper itself, and then I trim off the excess to get it ready for applying to the actual tile. Now, once you're ready to do that, clean your tile first. I use a alcohol and water solution to get rid of any dirt and oils and other residues. And once your tile is clean, go ahead and peel off the backing paper. And then I like to just center the decal over the center of the tile. Go ahead and you can measure if you want to, but I'm just eyeballing it, and once you have it where you think it needs to be, go ahead and press down the decal and then carefully peel away or roll off your transfer tape or transfer paper. Now, prepping the tile backside is an important step if you're going to be doing epoxy resin. On the first tile, you see that I put masking tape along all the edges there. In this case, now I'm using a whole sheet of automotive vinyl in this case, and I'm pressing down all the edges and sealing it very well. And then what you'll see me do is trim off all those excess vinyl on the edges. What this does, the masking tape or the vinyl, is prevent when you pour epoxy resin over, some of it will drip over the edges and will tend to run underneath of the tile. What the masking tape or the vinyl does is provide a layer that the epoxy resin will drip onto and that you can just easily peel it off versus trying to have to labor and scrape off epoxy resin from underneath the tile, which will have bonded to the tile backing very hard and is very difficult to remove. Before starting to do the epoxy resin coating, let's go over the supplies and tools that you're going to need, or at least that I used for this particular project. You can see here I have all these things contained in a box, a big cardboard box. I'll explain the box here in just a minute. But you can see that I have just it's a cookie sheet, and I wrapped it in, or I laid some foil inside, and that's to catch any residue, or excuse me, epoxy resin that drips off and over. That way it doesn't destroy my cookie sheet, which I'll use for other purposes later on. You can see that I've got 4 plastic cups set up, and those are basically my stands, if you will, to place the tiles on to lift them up off of the cookie sheet. You'll notice that I have a little piece of cheesecloth there, or it's actually a tack cloth that I bought at, I think, Home Depot or some hardware store, and that's just to very, very lightly wipe down, brush it over really, my tiles just before pouring the epoxy resin. And what that does is it grabs any dust that might have settled on your tiles or whatever you're going to be epoxy coating before you actually apply the coating. To the left, I've got a couple of just nitrile gloves, latex gloves. To protect your hands, you'll want to wear the protection on your hands in case you get some of the epoxy resin coating on it, because it does create a chemical reaction generating heat and can burn your skin. Looking up here, that's some of the epoxy resin that I'm going to be using. I just got that at, I believe, Menards or Home Depot or Lowe's, some hardware store. I've got a marker for marking, and that's actually a paint pen, really. And I'll explain that here in a second. And then a little one of those medicine measuring cups that you get whenever you buy liquid medicines, like liquid Tylenol or something like that. And that's going to be, I'll show you that a little bit for the hack that I use on measuring out equal parts of epoxy resin and the hardener. To the right of that, you see that I've got a clear plastic cup with a wooden popsicle stick, and that is to mix the hardener and the epoxy resin itself, and then the popsicle stick I'll be using to stir that up, as well as to help with the application of the epoxy resin. Last but not least, you're going to need some sort of heat source. You can see that I have a propane torch here. I'm comfortable using a propane torch. I use it almost every day at work for vinyl wrapping. If you do use it, just be careful. It does generate a lot of heat, and that's going to be, you need a heat source to pop out any bubbles that form in the epoxy resin while you're applying it. Other sources of heat that I have used, and you can use if you're not comfortable or don't have one of these torches, is a heat gun. Now just be careful, heat guns do push out a lot of air, and it can push off, depending on how close you get, the resin off of the tile in this case, or whatever you're applying, off of that surface. So you want to be careful with that. I would not necessarily recommend using a hairdryer because I don't think it gets hot enough, and then too, it puts out way too much air and will definitely move all the resin around on the surface of your substrate. Another thing that I have used before is one of those stick lighters, and then that way you can have a little bit of distance between your hand and the resin, but also have direct heat that you can put really close to the resin to pop those bubbles. Alright, so with that, oh, and then the cardboard box, once you've applied the resin to the tiles, the cardboard box, you'll want to cover it with this so that no dust and contaminants in the air settle in on your nice and clear resin while it is curing. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the epoxy resin coating. So I wanted to show you guys a quick little hack as far as measuring out equal parts of resin and hardener. Instead of pouring something into a measuring cup and then pouring it out, because of how thick the resin in particular is, and the hardener is a little bit thinner, it'll stick when you pour it down into a measuring cup. So much will stick in here that it'll basically throw your measurements off. It's so thick like syrup, a lot of it will stay in here unless you feel like trying to get all that out. One way to do so is to pour directly into your mixing vessel, which I'm going to be using this clear plastic cup. Now it's kind of hard to determine equal amounts if you don't have anything to measure by. So what I like to do is I'll take this little mini measuring cup, which you get in when you buy liquid medicines, and what I'll do is I'll fill it up with water. And it's important to use a clear cup that you're going to be mixing the resin and hardener in. Pour that water in, and then however much you want, I'm going to use 2 of these per ingredient. So that's 1, and that's 2. And then what I'll do is I'll take a paint pen, a marker, whatever, and then mark the water line. Okay, and that will tell me how much to pour in for the first ingredient I put in, typically the resin before the hardener. Leave that water in there. Then what you want to do is fill up 2 more times, because it's typically equal parts resin and hardener. 1, 2, and then make a water line. It's important also to put your cup on a level surface, obviously, and then that way you know how much more to pour in. So you'll pour resin up to that line first, and then you'll just pour hardener on top of that line next, and that will be your equal part measurements, because you know that you did each of those lines was 2 of those known volumes. Alright, so let's get this resin and hardener mixed together. One quick note, I know in my other part of the video I showed that I was going to use the other brand of epoxy resin and hardener. I'm actually going to be using this Art and Glow, which I picked up on Amazon, and the reviews are really good with it, so I'm going to give this a try. But same concept applies. It wants equal parts of resin and hardener. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to pour this out until I hit my first line. And you can see how syrupy and sticky this is, which is why I don't recommend using a small measuring cup, pouring it into here, and then trying to measure from there, because it will leave so much excess on the side of the cups that your measurements are going to be off. Okay, so before you actually hit the line, I recommend stopping letting it settle just for a second because it is so viscous or so thick that it has kind of like a bowed top. All right, so I can see that it's settled and it's just a little bit below the line, so I'm going to add just a touch more. And always add a little bit less than you think you need, because then you can always add more. So letting that settle. And you can kind of see bubbles in that already, and that's totally fine. That's going to happen. You do want to try to minimize that if possible. I've not found a good way myself yet. All right, so that looks like that's going to be perfect. And notice I am wearing my rubber gloves now. Now to add the hardener, and again equal parts, in which we pre-measured the method I showed you just a minute ago or a little bit ago in the video. So now I'm going to pour the hardener out, which is not quite as thick. So I'm going to pour just below the line and kind of let that settle for a second here. Kind of getting the hardener is floating on top right now. And it looks to me like it's right on line. So next, instructions for this said go ahead and mix this up thoroughly for about 2 to 5 minutes, if I remember correctly. And it says to make sure that you thoroughly mix it up. Scrape the bottom, scrape the sides, get all the hardener and all the resin itself mixed very thoroughly. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to mix this for the next 2 to 5 minutes, and we'll pick up once it's ready to go. Alright guys, so I've mixed the resin for about 4 minutes and it looks like it's fully mixed, and I make sure I scraped all the sides and scooped up from the bottom to make sure that everything was mixed together. Now before we get started, you can see I've got my tiles set up on my cups over the tray with a catch pan there. I showed you earlier that I had this little cheesecloth or tack cloth. What I'll do is make sure that you're in an environment that has pretty low dust. I'm in, if you can't tell, a bathroom, which has a vent, so I can turn that on here just after I get done pouring. But then two, also it's a bathroom I rarely ever use, or anybody in the house ever uses, so it's fairly low dust. What you could also do is before you go into the room is just take a spray bottle and put on its finest mist setting, and then spray up into the air and let that mist fall down to the ground, and that should grab any dust particles that are also in the air. But then last that I like to do is take this little tack cloth. It is kind of sticky in a sense, sort of, so you don't want to push it on there, but just very lightly run it over the top of your tile or whatever it is you're going to be doing. And what it will do is, because it is sticky in a sense, it will pick up any dust or dust like debris that maybe have fallen onto the surface of whatever it is you're going to be putting it on. All right, now with that, put that off to the side. What I like to do is, I'll continue to mix this as I do this. I'll pour about a quarter, the size of a little bit bigger than a quarter, actually that's way bigger than a quarter, onto the center of a tile, and then kind of use my popsicle stick to then spread it out a little bit more. Do that for all of these here. All right, and then like I said before, just I use the popsicle stick to then spread this out all over the surface, making sure I get to the very edges. I don't necessarily want to push it over the edge yet, and if anything does fall over the edge, that's fine. But I definitely want to get it to the edge to ensure that it has full coverage of the entire tile in this case. So I've got this one almost spread out all the way. This guy's dripping, and if it does drip, what I like to do is kind of just use my popsicle stick and smear it on the sides. Then it helps create like a nice little seal as well. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit and basically just continue to move the epoxy over the entire surface to ensure that it reaches the edges of each tile until it just starts to drip over a little bit. If you need to, add a little extra resin to ensure full coverage over the surface of the tile, and pay particular attention to ensure that the resin gets to and a little bit over the tips, the corner tips of the tiles there. It tends to, I've found that it tends to pull back a little bit, so add a couple drops or a drop of extra resin to the edge there as well. Use the side of the stick, use the stick to smear any resin that's dripping over the side along the side edges of the tile, and that creates kind of a nice little seal down on the side there using the resin that's already fallen off of the tile itself. So continue to do that until you have full coverage of the tile with epoxy resin. All right, so now that I have that done, what I'm going to do is take my torch and I'm going to use it to pop the bubbles in the epoxy itself. So when you're using a torch, be careful. It is a very hot source of heat. It comes out a lot of heat really fast. So I like to just do bursts, just like that. And I don't know if you can see the bubbles disappearing. I'll try to zoom in here. I don't know if you can see the Merry Christmas there. So I'll hit some heat. You can kind of see the bubbles just disappearing right out of the epoxy. Same thing with my logo tile up there. And then the last one there. Now with a torch, I would not recommend getting super close and blasting a bubble that you see as being stubborn and not popping. I would just try to do multiple passes of heat to try to get it. Because I know that from experience, if you get at it with the torch in a certain area, you will burn the vinyl, or not the vinyl, the epoxy, and it'll turn it kind of a brown color, and that will not go away. So what I also like to do once I've done that is I will take a concentrated, more intense light source, like the flashlight on your phone, and kind of get a little closer and see if there's any micro bubbles that are still left. And I can kind of see some in there. So that tells me I need to hit this with a little bit more heat as well to pop all those out. All right. Let's check it over one more time. Zoom back out, in. All right, that's looking good. All right, guys, so once you've got that, the last step to do is to get your cardboard box. Carefully just place it right over your tiles. And that will keep out any dust and particles from landing on the surface of your tiles while it cures. Alright guys, so I've taken them out of the box and you can see these are done. They turned out pretty nicely actually. Nice smooth glassy surface. Overall came out pretty good. Alright, and so the next step is to peel off the backing, the masking tape or the vinyl wrap that I put on the back to get rid of the excess drips of vinyl, and I'll show you what that looks like underneath. So this one I have wrapped the entire back in just a white sheet of vinyl, but you can see those hard drips of resin that have formed there, and we're going to be peeling off the vinyl to get rid of that excess resin. Then you'll have a flat back again for putting things like cork backing or little felt footing pads to make these into decorative tile coasters if you wanted to. Alright, so we'll take off one that has the vinyl on the back, and so what I'm going to do is take my utility knife and just make a score mark there. Then what I'm going to do is maybe I'll use the utility knife to kind of pick up a piece, there we go, or an edge of it. And then I'm just going to start peeling away, and hopefully this works the way I intended or hoped that it would work. And you can see that it's lifting up those drips of vinyl nice and easily, nice and cleanly, leaving a nice clean edge. Popping that off. Peeling this off. And this actually so far is working way better than the other techniques that I'd used before to protect the back, which is to put different kinds of tape. And I've used masking tape, painter's tape, electrical tape, and they've all allowed some of the resin to soak underneath and through. And so you can see how quickly and easily I was able to peel off the back of that because I wrapped it in vinyl wrap, and to be able to peel off all those resin drips. And you also saw that the vinyl did not allow very much, if any, just a little bit here, it looks like maybe a little bit there, residue or resin to soak through and underneath. Alright, and so to put a cork backing on this one, you can see that to start off with I put a soft microfiber cloth down here because I'm going to turn this over onto its face and I don't want to damage or scratch the newly laid resin front there. So here's my cork backing. I already bought this in a pack from Amazon. It's a pre-cut square, big enough for these 4 1/4 inch tiles. It does come already with adhesive on it, and it's basically a peel and stick cork sticker for all intents and purposes. So super simple, super easy. Flip over your tile, peel the backing, kind of just generally get it centered how you want. Lay it on lightly and then press her down. Alright, now you have a decorative tile coaster made with vinyl and with epoxy resin. Alright guys, so I hope you found this video to be helpful, informative, and instructive, maybe a little bit of entertaining. And if you did, please give it a thumbs up. And also please consider hitting that subscribe button. And when you hit that subscribe button, look for the little notification bell towards the bottom right of the screen or the image. And then hit that, and that way you'll get notifications whenever I post new content to the channel. Thanks again guys for all your support. Have a great day.
Make all the demons quiet, yeah, we